All right, I think you could be seated. Normally at this time I would bring Colton up for announcements. The only real announcement that we have is that we on April 30th, that is 2 weeks from today, we will have a potluck after church, followed by a baby shower, followed by afternoon service that will start right after that at 1:15 or so. So there's a potluck where you don't have to bring anything though. Where church is covering the mains, and so. This is where we're having the it's a half sort of like an afternoon tea, and the other half is a fried chicken and sort of a little comfort food. All right, good morning. Take your Bibles, turn with me to 1 Samuel. 1 Samuel, chapter 1. We resume our series on prayer. We have preached. I got a Bible that you could have. I've got some of those military. It's just paperback, but it's. I don't think I've got one in the car. but I'll make sure that you get one the next time you're here. I'll have one the next time I come with me, and so we can definitely set you up for that. Our series on prayer has gone from topics of what to do, what not to do. We looked at the Lord's Prayer as a model and saw the 6 helpers, the who, what, when, where, how, why we should pray. And right before our Easter series, we looked at Christ, our example. We will look at 5 more examples in Scripture of individuals who were known for their prayer lives, who had effective prayer lives, who got their prayers answered. We will double up in some weeks, but this week we're looking only at one character, and that message will actually continue tonight as well. So the message that will be started now will continue tonight at 5, in the 5 o'clock hour. In 1 Samuel chapter 1, we will begin to read through this, and the title for this message, if you have to have one, is called Profiles in Prayer. Hannah. We find a lady that's mentioned in only 2 chapters out of 1,189 chapters in the Bible. That is 0.2% of all the Bible. Not a major character, not an Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, not a Moses, not a Jesus, not Paul. Mentioned in only 2 chapters, yet we find her to be very important in the study of prayer. I include her in my series in Profiles in Prayer as only one of 5 individuals that are not named Jesus Christ who give us an exemplary model of prayer. We jump right in here and begin reading in verse 1. Now there was a certain man of Ramath-Zophim of Mount Ephraim. From hereafter we'll call this place Ramah, because it is shortened to that later, we'll see. And his name was Elkanah, the son of Jeroham, the son of Elihu, the son of Tohu, the son of Zuph, and Ephrathite. Now Ephrathite is another name of an Ephraimite. He's of the tribe of Ephraim. Ephraim is located a little bit north of Jerusalem, just stacked on top of Judah, is a small portion of Israel. He had 2 wives. The name of one was Hannah, the name of the other, Peninnah. And Peninnah had children, but Hannah had no children. And this man went up out of his city yearly to worship and to sacrifice to the Lord of hosts in Shiloh. And the 2 sons of Eli, Hophni and Phinehas, the priests of the Lord, were there. Now, Eli, Hophni, and Phinehas are another message for another time. We won't get sidetracked into them. But Eli is the high priest. Eli is also serving as a judge at this point in time. Israel is still in the time of the judges. This would have been around 1100 BC. We know this because Eli is the current judge and priest, and there is one who is yet to be born named Samuel, who will be the final judge in Israel. The setting is Shiloh. Shiloh is located, if you have in your mind, maybe you've even got a map in your Bible there, but if you have in your mind the shape of the nation of Israel, it's sort of like a tall trapezoid, okay, if you want to think of it that way, with the Mediterranean Sea slanting in on it here, and you've got Israel as a tall nation there. Think state of in terms of shape. The state of New Hampshire is about what it's going to look like. And so you've got Jerusalem in the southern portion, and roughly 20 miles north of Jerusalem is this place called Shiloh that is mentioned there in verse number 3. Shiloh is where the tabernacle came to rest after Israel was finished with their wanderings, and once they began to conquer the nation, to conquer Canaan. And the tabernacle was eventually retired, and the worship took place in a set building, a temple. Most of the time when we think temple, we think Jerusalem, but the very first temple was here in Shiloh. And we see there that there is a temple as we continue to read here. The place where Elkanah lived, Ramah, or the Ramath-Zophim, was about halfway between Jerusalem and Shiloh. Of course, in your old maps, it's not going to say Jerusalem, it's going to say Jebus. because that was the name of the city prior to David conquering it. So we look at these names that we see here. Right away, we see a man named Elkanah. Elkanah means God has purchased, God has acquired. It's someone that God possesses, so to speak. Then we see the name Hannah. Hannah is also, in the Hebrew, sometimes you'll see that as the name as Chana. And we get our names Hannah as well as Anna, deriving from this. Hannah means favor or grace. Hannah is one of Elkanah's wives. She is, we can discover this by both studying the Jewish writings as well as logically, can determine that Hannah is the first wife. Not only because she's mentioned first in this list here, but keep in mind that a primary reason for marriage and primary reason for polygamy in Old Testament times was reproduction. We're about to learn something about Hannah. It said there in the end of verse 2, Hannah had no children. And then even as we look down to verse number 5, we see the Lord had shut up her womb. We see her as as being unable to reproduce. Because Hannah was barren, she could have been the one to initiate the arrangement to give Elkanah a second wife by which he could have a son. Much like Sarai did with Hagar, Abram's wife. Much like Rachel did, married to Jacob when she gave Bilhah, her handmaid, to him to wife so that that child could be credited as hers. Perhaps Elkanah had the idea. The average man of that time would not have just collected a second wife just because he needed more love. The purpose was for reproduction. Now you might be thinking, well, there are other men in the Bible I can think of that had more than one wife. We know Jacob's situation. Jacob was tricked into marrying Leah, but he really wanted to marry Rachel, and he had to end up marrying both. David had multiple wives. Solomon had 1,000 women at his disposal. But again, these were not your average man. And keep this in mind too. God permitted, but he did not necessarily promote polygamy. We even find Jesus' words where he stated, in the beginning, it was not so. The it he's talking about is divorce. But also in the beginning, polygamy was not so as well. God created one man for one woman for life. That second name there, the second wife, Peninnah, that's believed to come from a Hebrew word that means pearl. She's the second wife. She comes on the picture there. The verse here, verse 2, tells us she had children. Hannah had no children. Because Hannah was unable to bear children, the Mishnah, which is the recorded teachings of the rabbis over time, tell us that if a man's wife had not given him a child after 10 years, that she was declared barren, and that man could legally marry another woman to raise up seed after him. Using that as the basis for this, Elkanah married Peninnah, and over the following years begat 10 sons. You're like, where do we find the number 10? We find 10 sons mentioned a little later on, and we believe it's there as a literal device and not just a figurative one. As a matter of fact, we can look there in verse 8. Then said Elkanah, her husband, to her, to Hannah that is, Hannah, why weepest thou? And why eatest thou not? And why is thy heart grieved? Am I not better to thee than 10 sons? The idea there being a very literal situation where the second wife, Peninnah, had 10 sons, Hannah had 0 sons and 0 daughters. The time at which this family traveled to the temple there in Shiloh was believed to have happened in the 19th year of marriage between Elkanah and Hannah. Whether or not that's so, we're only going off of Jewish tradition there. That's not important, but they had been married long enough for this second wife, Peninnah, to have had multiple children. Down to verse 4. When the time was that Elkanah offered, he gave to Peninnah his wife, and to all her sons and her daughters portions. But unto Hannah he gave a worthy portion, for he loved Hannah, but the Lord had shut up her womb. Elkanah divvies up his gifts in such a way that Hannah gets the double portion. Understand, in Hebrew tradition, the firstborn would get the double portion. There is a firstborn out there, but he doesn't get the double portion. It's divided out so that everyone gets a single portion except for Hannah gets a double portion, showing his favoritism toward her. And why would he not be favored toward her? He was married to her the longest. He loved her first. There would be a natural affection there. We don't have to think about too much, fortunately, about, we need to, fellows, we need to make sure that we show all of our wives an equal amount of love and affection. Fortunately, we don't have that to contend with here. But Elkanah played favorites, and you can imagine how this might create problems. Yeah, but see, he did this to offset the fact that she didn't have children. I get all that. But place yourself in either person's situation, Hannah or Peninnah, and either way, you're going to feel slighted. You're going to feel shafted. Verse 5, we read there that said, he loved Hannah, but the Lord had shut up her womb. Someone might say here, in a perfect world, Elkanah loves one woman and has children with her, and there's no second wife, and they all live happily ever after. I would agree with that. In a perfect world. We know we don't live in a perfect world. But that last phrase in verse 5 might trouble us, might cause us to be a little unsettled, because we learned that God has kept and prevented Hannah from having children. This isn't just a situation of, we tried, it's just not working out, or, his hormones are low, her hormones are low. This is stated as God caused this to happen. And we might want to throw an accusation at God of, now God, that doesn't seem fair. See, because think of it this way. If you desire to have children, but you can't have children, you consider that a bad thing, right? If you want to have children and you can't. Throughout our time in ministry and places, we've come across couples that couldn't have children. And they've spent quite a sum of money to have in vitro fertilization. They've spent quite a sum of money to adopt. And if you want to have children and you can't have children naturally, you consider that a bad thing. And that prompts the age-old question of, why do bad things happen to good people? Or if we can phrase it another way, why did God allow this bad thing to happen in my life? I can't fully answer that question in one message. Nor could we ever answer that question fully unless we were as wise as God and all-knowing as He is. It would be similar to a new chess student sitting down and watching two grandmasters play a chess match. And while that young rookie might agree with some of the moves, other moves he may think were just completely bad moves, and other ones he would have no idea at all why they're happening, because that rookie chess player is thinking maybe one move ahead of where he is, and that grandmaster is thinking 20 moves ahead. In the same way, our thoughts are not God's thoughts. His ways are not our ways. And before we begin to say, God, why did you let this happen, or whatever else, you have to acknowledge you can't even begin to understand the way that God's mind works and how He is coordinating the events for thousands and millions of those that love Him, and you are but a small part of that. Now, I believe today we're going to see at least one reason that God withheld children from Hannah. I think we can see one reason right away. And I believe that reason, that primary reason that we're going to focus on this morning of why Hannah was not given children right away is so that God could make her an example of prayer that we would still be following nearly 3,000 years later. Verse 6, now we continue reading. And her adversary also provoked her sore for to make her fret, because the Lord had shut up her womb. Now, who was this adversary? You say, well, from the reading, I'm going to assume that her adversary was this other wife. We also know that we as Christians all have a common adversary. So, who is it that's playing mind games with her? Is it this other wife? Is it Satan, that old Diabolos, the deceiver, the accuser? Well, we do find in verse 7 that we're told exactly who the adversary was. And as he did so year by year, this is talking about Elkanah going to the temple yearly, when she went up to the house of the Lord, so she provoked her. She provoked her. Therefore, she wept and did not eat. Makes it clear to us here that it is Peninnah, the second wife, who is doing the torturing of Hannah. The Midrash records some of the ways that she may have taunted Hannah in a way that's not directly being hateful, yet we know what the intent is. Here are a few examples that they gave. Did you buy a sweater for your eldest son, Hannah? Did you buy a shirt for your second son? Hannah, aren't you getting up to wash your children's faces before school starts? Knowing that she's childless. You see how this is heartless and cruel. Aren't you going to greet your children when they return from school? Or to maybe just offhand say to Elkanah, without even directing Hannah, not even addressing her directly, Elkanah, you haven't given my son his portion yet. Just to rub it in. Nothing that can be taken as a direct insult, but just things that are hurtful. It said there in verse 7 that Elkanah went yearly to make the sacrifice. And yearly, you saw the situation play out between Peninnah and Hannah. Verse 9, so Hannah rose up after they had eaten in Shiloh, and after they had drunk, skip verse 8. Then said Elkanah her husband to her, Hannah, why weepest thou, and why eatest thou not, and why is thy heart grieved? Am I not better to thee than 10 sons? Again, Hannah's response here is that she wept. She did not eat. Verse 10, she was in bitterness of soul and prayed unto the Lord and wept sore. Wept sore. The word fret there, having trouble finding it right now. Do you see fret? Do you see what verse that's in? She caused her to fret. Where is that? Verse 6. For to make her fret. We have in our minds what the word fret means, but I think it's a little mistaken. At least it was for me until I looked that up. The word fret there means this: to be moved with anger, to rage, to burn. And with burning comes consuming. Fret is an adjective used along with the word leprosy in the Old Testament. It describes a fretting leprosy. In other words, a leprosy that consumes away. And this woman, even though she was not eating, it wasn't the lack of eating that was causing her to waste away. It was her fretting. It was her soul being troubled. It was her being moved to anger, moved to weeping by her adversary, by the antagonist in this story. I do want to look at that last phrase in verse 8 there, where Elkanah says something that has one of two possible meanings there. Imagine that you're a woman who wants to have children. You can't have children, and your husband comes along to you and says, hey, babe, why are you bothered? Am I not as good to you as 10 sons? Ladies, what would you think about that? You'd think, well, yeah, I love you, but that's kind of a jerk statement that you made there. If you knew my heart and you understood how important it was for me to have children, especially in this society where women are valued based on their ability to have children, no, you're not better to me than 10 sons. I realize I have to have you in order to have 10 sons, but you're not better to me than 10 sons. You might view that as a really stuck up sort of thing. Am I not of more value to you than 10 sons would be? I'm surely you see me as more valuable. That's one way to interpret what he said. Here's another one. And this one doesn't sound quite as jerky when you hear it this way. When he says, am I not better to you than 10 sons? Again, we're not thinking better there in terms of comparative, but in terms of treatment. Let me word it this way. Do I not treat you with the kindness that exceeds 10 sons? Yes, you don't have children to love on you, but I have gone out of my way to make sure that you receive extra special treatment from me so that you know that you are my beloved. And that doesn't sound quite as cringy as the first statement. Which one was meant by that? It's really not possible for us to determine. But either way, in Hannah's heart, she would like to have 10 sons. She'd settle for 5 sons. Matter of fact, she would love to have just one son, if that's all that she could have. As you look back there in verse 7, you saw that year by year, every year you had this same principle. They would take their trip to Shiloh. Every year Elkanah made this voyage. Every year Peninnah antagonized Hannah. Every year Hannah wept sore. Every year Elkanah tried to comfort his first wife. But in verse 9, so Hannah rose up after they had eaten at Shiloh and after they had drunk. Now Eli the priest sat upon a seat by a post of the temple of the Lord. This comes into play later on. And she was in bitterness of soul and prayed to the Lord and wept sore. So year by year this thing had been happening. But maybe right here in year number 9 or year number 19, we don't know what year, we see potentially a change in the response from Hannah. Now, we don't know. Maybe she had come and she had prayed what she's about to pray many times, but the only time we have record of it is this particular time they've come to the temple. And I think there's a lesson in there for us. There are going to be things that happen in your life that make you angry, that make you upset, that will make you cry. Even tough guys like Colton. You're going to have things that knock you to your knees. And it might knock you down again and again and again. And we could be mad about it. We could be sad about it. But maybe those things are sent so that we are driven to our knees in prayer. Because we find recorded this time something happened different than all the previous times and all the previous visits to the temple yearly. Hannah, this time in verse 10, she was in bitterness of soul and prayed to the Lord and wept sore. In terms of outline, there are 5 points behind what made Hannah's prayer notable. I hope for us to see 3 of them this morning, and then we'll look at the remainder tonight. First of all, number 1, there was a problem. There was a problem. What was the problem? Verse 5 and verse 6 both say the Lord had shut up her womb. That's what the problem was. I heard a preacher make this statement one time, and the first time he said it, I disagreed with it. The more I thought on it, the more I agreed with it. And as I've studied my Bible, I think I'm fully on board with it now. Here's the statement. For God to send a miracle, there must be a problem that necessitates the miracle. When we think of Jesus' miracles in the New Testament, when we think of Elijah and Elisha and Moses, none of them performed a miracle just for the fun of it, just so it could be seen or just so someone would get some credit, even if that person was God. The miracle was always performed in response to a problem that existed. If I ask you by show of hands, you don't have to put your hand up. If I ask you by show of hands, who out here would like to see God perform a miracle in your life? We all by default would say, yeah, I'm on board with that. I'd like to see a miracle performed in my life. But God performs miracles in response to problems that exist. Who out there wants to have in their life a problem that requires a miracle to fix it? Then we all say, no, I like things the way they are. I'll settle for just that even keel, and I don't want to have any deep problem that needs a huge miracle to offset it. I believe I'm just fine with the status quo. We're not ready to sign up for the problem, but we all want the miracle to solve the problem. In other words, we're just looking for a miracle. We're just looking for a blessing. But Hannah had a real problem, a problem that necessitated a miracle. The second thing that we see here is a provocation. A provocation. We saw there in verses 6 and 7 that her enemy provoked her to anger, provoked her to fret, to burn, to be consumed with this trouble that she was dealing with there. What do we do whenever someone provokes us, whenever someone wrongs us? I remember a bumper sticker that I bought when I was a teenager. One of these cool things I thought would sound real good. I don't get mad. You know how it finishes, right? I get even. I don't get mad. I get even. I take care of my business. You know, that's a completely unbiblical attitude. Romans 12:19 says this, "Dearly beloved, avenge not yourselves, but rather give place unto wrath. For it is written, vengeance is mine, I will repay, saith the Lord." Sometimes we think that God gave this command just so that we would play nice with others and not catch a charge ourselves. But there's more to it than that. When we think of Jesus giving the Sermon on the Mount, He tells His disciples that if your enemy smites you on the cheek, turn the other cheek also. Turn the other cheek. Matthew 5 talks about repaying evil with good. That's what differentiates us from the world. The world understands revenge. You wrong me, I'll wrong you right back. Eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. You do this to me, I will repay you in exactly the same way. They think that's what the golden rule is, even though that's not what the golden rule is. They say, I'm going to give you back what you give me and more. But as believers, we're told to give a soft answer. We're told to repay cursing with blessing. Blessed are ye when men shall revile you and persecute you and say all manner of evil against you falsely for my sake. Rejoice and be exceeding glad, for great is your reward in heaven, for so persecuted they the prophets which are before you. There will be a reward in heaven for obedience in this matter. Somebody provoked me, and I did not react to them the same way. As a matter of fact, I was kind to them. God says there'll be a reward in heaven. Okay, well, that's all nice and all, but I'd like to get something down here right now, too. Well, God will do that as well. Avenge carries a bigger idea here than just punish in response to another's transgression. I had something done wrong to me, so therefore I'm not supposed to avenge myself, but I let God get you. I'll let Him take care of you, and that thing that you did wrong to me, God will put a bigger stick on you than you put on me. Avenge means more than just that, because in that type of situation, okay, Ryan did me wrong, so here I am being wronged, and so now I'm just sitting back waiting on God to strike him back because I'm not going to do it. Well, in that case, we just have two people over here who have both been wrong, and nobody's any better than they were before. Avenge means more than just to issue punishment to the person that wronged me. The Greek verb there is ekdikio, which means to dispense justice. God doesn't just punish the person that punishes me. God makes me whole as well as a part of this avenging. We should expect God to make things right or equitable. This is powerful. When Peninnah provoked, the verb there for her provoking Hannah to anger and to fretting, the word in Hebrew is ra'am, which has two meanings. One is to incite to anger, and the other means to thunder. Now understand this. God is the righteous judge of all the earth who will do right, and there will be no thunder that is not followed by rain. Taking it into the situation that we have here between Peninnah and Hannah, Peninnah brings the thunder into Hannah's life, and God brings the rain to follow it. God will bring the rain on the arid soil that is Hannah's womb to bring about that son that she's desired for so long. A third thing about the avenging and about the provocation there. God loves to make himself known in ways where only he can receive the credit. Here's what I mean by this. You're Hannah, okay? Your husband's second wife has been provoking you year after year, always the same thing, and you're driven to anger, and you want to make it right yourself. You want to avenge yourself. How can you avenge yourself? What would be justice here? Justice would be for you to have children, correct? You don't necessarily wish evil on Peninnah, although you wouldn't necessarily pray for her that it wouldn't happen. But the only way that you could get justice is for you to be given the number of children she has, right? I mean, that's the only true justice here, not just for her to be punished and you still to be barren. If you want justice, then you want to have children. There's absolutely no way for Hannah to avenge herself in this situation. There is nothing that Hannah can do to make herself have the children to catch up to Peninnah, or even to just have one. There's absolutely nothing that she can do. Only God can do this. I mean, because otherwise, what are we thinking? Hannah has no children. The only way that it can be made even is for Peninnah to have no children. What's Hannah going to do? Go kill all of her children? No. So the only way that this could be rectified was for God to step in and to do this. The Lord, it said there in verses 5 and 6, the Lord had shut up her womb. And by the way, what God shuts, no man can open. And what God opens, no man can shut, we find in Revelation. And in this case, we see the same thing happening here. Only God can provide the answer here. Only God can avenge. Only God can make it right. Understand this. God has a special place in his heart for fatherless and widows. And I believe he has a special place in his heart for the childless as well. Whatever kind of disadvantage you have been dealt, God knows it, God sees it, and God will avenge. Have you been cheated in your life? Who's done you wrong? What is it that you have that's holding you back that doesn't hold back everyone else? God knows what that thing is. And I will make this statement to you that one of these two things will happen for God to avenge your situation. Number one, either God will correct what is wrong. In this case, what was wrong, the problem with Hannah, was that she could not conceive. The Lord had shut up her womb. So in response to Hannah's prayer, God opened her womb. He reversed the thing that was her handicap, if I can use that word. So in your life, if you've been disadvantaged, God will avenge that in one of two ways, either by fixing the problem that you pray to Him for. Now you may be thinking, are you saying that God will correct everything? No, I said that's one of two things that God can do in your life to avenge you. 2 Corinthians chapter 12, verse 9. The whole chapter, but verse 9 is where it culminates. We find here Paul coming to God and having a discussion about removing a thorn in the flesh, some sort of physical limitation that is bothering him. And he goes to God and says, God, would you please fix this? Would you avenge me? Would you do this? And God answers him this way. He says, my grace is sufficient for thee, for my strength is made perfect in your weakness. And then Paul responds, most gladly, therefore, would I rather glory in my infirmities, that the power of Christ may rest upon me. When you are provoked and whenever God has said He would avenge, when you have some sort of disadvantage, disability, shortcoming in your life, God will do one of two things. he will reverse that thing, or he will compensate for it in some other way. What was Paul's thorn in the flesh? Don't know. Not told. It's been left vague for us to not know. Some say it was poor vision. Some say it was chronic pain. I don't know what the thing was. But Paul viewed it as a hindrance to his ministry. But God says, no, I'm going to take that thing that you think is a weakness, and I'm going to show my strength through it. Being that you, Paul, might not be able to do this thing on your own, but people are going to know that I'm working through you because I'm going to put an extra special touch on you. And because of that, people will understand that you are indeed a choice servant of God. And whatever you're lacking, I will compensate for it in another way. God will not allow you to be disadvantaged, to be provoked without avenging. God will avenge. And it may be just a situation where you lean on God and say, yes, God, I trust you. I trust that your grace is sufficient for me and that your strength is made perfect in my weakness. Now we continue to read here, verse 11. And she vowed a vow and said, O Lord of hosts, if thou wilt indeed look on the affliction of thine handmaid, and remember me, and not forget thine handmaid, but will give unto thine handmaid a man-child, then will I give him unto the Lord all the days of his life, and there shall no razor come upon his head. And I want you to think for just a minute here about that phrase of no razor coming upon his head. Do you know of any other biblical characters of whom this was said, that no razor would come upon his head? In fact, what we're finding here is the description of what we find in Numbers chapter 6 of what is called the vow of a Nazirite. Name another person who this was said of. There's one that's very easy, one pretty obvious. Never had a haircut until one day he did, and my wife's given it to us. Samson was a committed Nazirite. Well, he wasn't as committed as he should have been, but the vow was upon him. Can you think of another Bible character who had? Now, I'm going to tell you, we did not go through this ahead of time. I have not, not Elisha. But John the Baptist is another character of which we find this of. We have one more person who's named in Scripture who took a Nazirite vow but was not a lifelong Nazirite. If I tell you the book of Bible, you'll get it pretty easily. He's in the book of Acts. This one you may have overlooked. But the Apostle Paul also took a short-term vow of a Nazirite, and possibly even two of those vows.
Can you take a Nazirite vow, like once you're already older and have already been taken? Or
yes. Look at number 6, for example, because this talks about the process. We do have in our minds that it's something that must happen at birth or even before birth, like what happened with John the Baptist or Samuel or Samson. But in Numbers 6, it begins to tell us right away, verse 2, speaking to the children of Israel and saying to them, when either man or woman shall separate themselves to vow a vow of a Nazirite, to separate themselves unto the Lord, he shall separate himself from wine and strong drink, and shall drink no vinegar of wine or vinegar of strong drink, neither shall he drink any liquor of grapes, nor eat moist grapes or dried. All the days of his separation shall he eat nothing that is made of the vine tree, from the kernels even to the husk. All the days of the vow of his separation, there shall no razor come upon his head, until the days be fulfilled in which he separateth himself unto the Lord. He shall be holy, and shall let the locks of the hair of his head grow. All the days that he separateth himself unto the Lord, he shall come at no dead body. We can continue to read about the dead body, but those are the 3 requirements right there of a Nazirite vow. To not cut the hair during the time of the vow, to not touch a dead body, and to not drink or eat of the fruit of the vine, whether we're talking alcoholic, whether we're talking fresh, even talking about eating raisins, the dried fruit there that I talked about. And a person can choose to do this. Now, Samuel had no choice. Samson had no choice. John the Baptist had no choice. But others, men and women, can make this vow, can choose to do so, and for a limited period of time. And Paul took 2 vows or at least took one vow in the book of Acts. That is in, you can read more about that in Acts 18 as well as Acts 21. And indeed, not only did Paul take a Nazirite vow, but the context leads us to believe that there are 4 others that took some sort of vow that consummated with the shaving of the hair, because that's what you would do at the end of the Nazirite vow, would be to shave your head and to take the hair and to throw it into the fire of the offerings, which would smell horrible, but that was what would be done. So that's the pattern of the Nazirite vow. And even though Hannah only mentions one aspect of the vow, it's widely and commonly believed that Samuel was dedicated as a Nazirite from his birth, based off of Hannah's prayer. We see the problem, the provocation, and then thirdly, we see the purpose. And we look at this for just a moment here. We examine that prayer carefully. It says there in verse 11, she says 3 things. O Lord of hosts, if thou wilt indeed look and remember and not forget thine handmaid. The first thing that she's saying here in terms of her purpose is, give me your attention, God. Look, remember, forget not. Now, what did Hannah do there? Verse 10, we look back, it says she was in bitterness of soul and prayed to the Lord and wept sore. To get God's attention, and I'm going to flip this on its head in a minute, she wept. We think of Psalm 126, verse 6. He that goeth forth and weepeth, bearing precious seed, shall doubtless come again with rejoicing, bringing his sheaves with him. Hannah is going forth weeping. She will come again rejoicing by the time we get to the end of this chapter. She wept and then she vowed. Verse 11 there, it says, she vowed a vow unto the Lord. What is a vow? It's a promise. It's a commitment. It hasn't been that long ago that you guys took your wedding vows, the vows of matrimony. What'd you do there? You made promises to each other. You made promises that you intend to keep. She made a promise here to God. And many times I think we're scared off from making vows and making promises to God by the verse in Ecclesiastes, I think it's chapter 6, verse 5. When thou vowest a vow unto God, defer not to pay it, for he hath no pleasure in fools. Pay that which thou hast vowed. It's better not to vow than to make a vow and to break it. We would all agree to that. We shouldn't make a promise to God that we don't intend to keep. So was Hannah in the wrong for making a vow here? No, because she intended to keep it. That verse is meant for us not to be cowardly. Well, I'm never going to make a vow since this verse is... It's not meant to make us cowardly. It's meant to make us committed. It's meant to make us follow through on the thing that we promised. Let me ask you this question. Is there a time as a child of God that you don't have God's attention? We were talking in Sunday school about being parents very soon, about what we've learned in our years of being parents. And as human beings, there are times when we don't know where our children are. There are times that we don't know what our children are doing. But God doesn't have that shortcoming. We always have God's attention. You say, well, then why did you say that Hannah wept and that she vowed to get God's attention? Because I really mean to turn that on its head. God had Hannah's attention, which brought her to this point. If you think there's a time that you don't have God's attention, let me ask you this question. Are there times that God doesn't have our attention? Sadly, I think there is. There are several reasons we might think that God has not listened to our prayer, mostly because God didn't answer on our timeline and do the things that we thought He should when we thought He should do them. But the things that we might do to ensure that we have God's attention really just means that He has our attention. So here's what Hannah asked for. She said, first of all, give me your attention. And then secondly, she said, give me a man-child. But wilt give unto thine handmaid a man-child. And then the third thing that she talked about giving, she said, I'll give him back to you. I'll give him right back. Now, this is how I want to close out this half of the message with this thought. Do your prayers revolve around how you can be profited or how God can be profited? Yes, she would have her reproach of childlessness taken away if God allowed her to bear a son. But she was going to give that child right back. God would receive all the glory from the answered prayer. She didn't ask for a quiver full of children like Peninnah had. She just asked for one. And she was going to give him right back. Just one man child. A man child that after he was weaned, she would not even get the privilege of raising him because she was going to send him to live with the priest at the temple. Ladies, could you bear the thought of, God, give me a child, and as soon as he's old enough to not depend on my breast milk, as soon as he's old enough to eat for himself, I'm going to give him away to somebody else? You're like, no, I don't think I want to sign up for that. Hannah's prayers were not focused on her good. Hannah's prayers were focused on God's glory. And it's that kind of praying that demonstrates that your heart is knit with God. And you're more likely to get your prayers answered that way. One of my life verses, I say one because there's been a few, is Psalm 37:4, which says, Delight thyself also in the Lord, and he shall give thee the desires of thine heart. Sometimes people are tempted to reconstruct that verse starting at the end. And he shall give thee the desires of thy heart. And people start to think, how can I get the desires of my heart? We all want the desires of our heart. You know, we'd like to have a time-traveling DeLorean, right? Or some people want Marty's cool 4x4 truck. Or, you know, we the sports car. We want the supermodel wife or the supermodel husband. Or we want all the things that we want, right? So how do we get all the things that we want? That's how people sometimes take Psalm 37:4 and deconstruct it. Well, to get everything that I want, what does it say? What does it say? Oh, delight thyself also in the Lord. Okay, I'm willing to feign delight in the things of the Lord so that I can get everything that I want, but that is the opposite of what that verse means. If you say, hey, I want this, so I'll do that, you're never going to get this. But when you start with the verse as presented, and I'll rephrase it just a little so that you understand. Let the source of your delight be the Lord. Let Him be your all in all. Let Him be your satisfaction. Let Him be your raison d'etre. Then your desires will be the ones that God puts into your heart. Imagine walking into prayer knowing that the exact thing that you're requesting is exactly what would please God the most. Would you go to God then confident that your prayer would be answered? Absolutely. Therefore, let us make Him our desire. Let us make His glory our purpose. And that was Hannah's purpose in praying this. Not to spoil the story for you if you've never read the book of 1 Samuel. And not to spoil the very ending of this message. But I feel like this is a good way to close. Hannah is going to give birth to one of the most influential and impactful people in the history of nation of Israel. And it's not because he goes to broker some great peace deal or because he's popular, or because he has lots of followers, but because he serves God in a time where true servants of God were lacking. He's mentioned not only in the book of 1 Samuel, he's also mentioned in Hebrews chapter 11 in the Hall of Faith as one who is worthy to be admired for his faith. Samuel is going to be a big deal. Hannah has no idea of how much God is going to use him when she prays this prayer. But her desire is for God to be glorified, for God to receive good from her problematic situation. Whatever it is you're praying for, ask yourself this. If I get what I want, will God be glorified? If the answer is no, or I don't know, then maybe we're focusing on the wrong thing with our prayers. Let's go to the Lord in prayer as we wrap up this sermon. I pray that this has been a challenge to you of how to see your prayer life from a biblical model of Hannah's life. Heavenly Father, I pray that you would work in our hearts, cause us to be drawn to you, Help our hearts to be knit to yours so that the very things that we desire are exactly the things that you desire. Help us to walk in close proximity to your will, that we might receive the things that we ask for your glory, and so that we can follow Hannah's pattern of prayer and follow her profile in prayer to get our prayers answered as well. In Christ's name we pray. Amen.